Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Steve Hawkins, and this is going to be the second tutorial for Imperia. We're going to cover characters in some detail, specifically leaders, viceroys, governors, and generals. How to work with them, what you can do to influence characters, talk a little bit more about the character screen, and about what the different traits and statistics mean. This way you can kind of understand a little bit more about your people, how to influence them, and most importantly, how to get done what you need to get done. Now, in Imperia, of course, if you've played or if you haven't played, it's very different from most 4X's or grand strategy games in that you don't control everything. You have a limited amount of power represented by your admin, but your characters actually do most of the work. And when I say characters, I'm talking mainly about your leaders. I'm talking about viceroys who run a planet, system governors who are responsible for a system, sector governors who are responsible for an entire sector, and of course your generals and eventually your admirals and what we call primes. And the primes will be leading your cabinet positions.
Your empire awaits, Your Excellence.
So we have a new game, and the first thing I like to do is take a look at my characters. So I go ahead and click on the Intel button, and I go to the character screen. And I take a look at, first of all, who are my allies. And these are the people that are in green. So we can see that Rich Jackson is a viceroy. He is the viceroy of Hawking, and he currently is a fan of mine because he is publicly committed to me. I also have Penny Black, who's a system governor, Alistair Garçon, system governor, and Candy Jackson, who is a sector governor. Now this is big because she's the Neo-Cyrus sector governor, and she has a power of 200, which makes her the most influential character in the game. So I'm going to go ahead and click on her. I'm going to go over some of each individual traits and kind of explain what they mean. So intelligence is basically how well does a character self-govern. Intelligence, characters with low intelligence generally will not run planets very well. They generally will not raise taxes when needed. They will not lower taxes when needed. They won't do a very good job of building the economy, and won't do a very good job of building according to the designation of the planet. Characters with high intelligence, especially towards 100, will do an excellent job of self-governing. Now, they may do that according to their traits, so it may not always be what you want, but they will do a much better job of following their established plan. They also tend to be more efficient. If you ask them to raise or lower taxes or raise or lower wages, they will tend to do it in a greater amount if they're more intelligent. They also, characters with a high intelligence can contribute to edicts and make them go faster. Power ranges from 0 to 200. So what power is, it is one of the most important statistics for a character. What that says is how influential is this character in the world of Imperia and in your empire. Typically, viceroys, unless they run a very influential planet, will have a power in about 10 to 20. System governors will generally be in the 50s. Sector governors can be as high as 200, depending on the sector that they govern. And there's a fairly complicated formula that explains power, but a lot of it has to do with the amount of military under their control and the value of the planets and systems under their control. Essentially, the higher, the bigger the planet, the more people that are on it, the better the economy. Generally, the more powerful, important the planet is. So that's directly reflected. So when you, as the Emperor, are trying to cobble a coalition in order to increase your power, you really want to concentrate on wooing people with more power to your side. Because not only do they have more influence over edicts, but they also have more influence over your overall political power. Alright, will. Once we start talking about revolts, right now there isn't a whole lot. Mainly this has to do with how well they repel blackmail and how prone they are to being persuaded or pressured. Characters with low will are very easily pressured and persuaded. Characters with a higher will, not so much. You need more pressure and persuasion points to do that. Once plots and other actions are in the game, will actually be very important because that will convert to how willing are they to take action, how willing are they to perform in a plot, are they to go if they've been wronged, how willing are they to go against you. Greed is another statistic from 0 to 100. This measures how greedy the character is. So this both shows the wealth that they have and how willing they are to take bribes, and how willing they are and how much they profit from taking honors. Characters with low greed tend to be repulsed by bribes. They won't necessarily accept, they will always accept an Imperial honor, but they won't always, you won't always see a major benefit from it. Characters with a higher greed typically tend to be more tyrannical, but not always. And they also tend to have less savory traits, including being dishonest and some other traits. Ambition is also probably the second most important trait behind loyalty. Ambition, it kind of ties in with will, in that what does a character want out of their career? Characters with low ambition will not necessarily look to move up or look to gain power, while characters with high ambition will always be looking to you when the will and want system is put in and you're able to basically sack and place characters in higher positions of power, how willing they are to move forward. So an example, if a system governor had a high ambition, they would be a lot more likely to make a request to you to be put in charge of a sector. And if they weren't put in charge of a sector after having that publicly demanded, then they would probably lose a lot of loyalty and may even join a plot against you. Again, ambition is not really modeled in the current version, but it will be extremely important as Imperia evolves. Charisma is very important as far as how the populace sees this governor. Right now, characters with low charisma do not make good governors or good viceroys. They're seen more or less as inept. They can't get their message across to their populace, and so they tend to have lower popular support. And this is important with things like assassination attempts. When you're trying to get intel, characters with low popular support are much easier to obtain intel and information to bribe. Characters with high popular support tend to be harder to do these things with because the populace supports them. They also tend to be harder to remove from office, and characters with higher charisma tend to gravitate to other characters with higher charisma. So if you, as the Emperor, have high charisma, characters, that is one factor that may help you. Loyalty is the most important trait. This determines how willing a character is to do what you ask them to do. So a character with low loyalty will be very unlikely to do what you request of them, and they will be far more likely to hold up edicts, while a character with high loyalty may be much more likely, depending on what you're asking them to do. Sometimes no amount of loyalty matters. If you're asking a benevolent character to kill or to pressure or to take a bribe, that won't come into play. But if they can possibly take an action, a higher loyalty will almost always ensure that. Now, you can raise loyalty in many ways, and we're going to go into that in just a minute. Age is obviously how old they are. Now, as they get older, our characters do die through natural causes and other ways if they get sick. Because you are young, you will have a built-in natural affinity towards younger leaders. They are a little bit more receptive to you early on, and a little bit more willing to go with what you're looking for. But younger, this is kind of an anomaly. When I go back to do a pass with the age, I'm going to fix it to where a 25-year-old cannot be the sector governor of Neo-Cyrus. That's going to tie into age somewhat, and that's going to provide an additional challenge that you'll have younger viceroys basically running these frontier planets, and they may be more willing to help you, but you're going to have to kind of build them up, while you have kind of the old guard that will need to be either dealt with or removed or in some way dealt with. Health, characters have different health that slowly declines over time, and this will also be affected with events. Also, attempted assassinations that fail can affect a character's health. Wealth right now does not play a major role. Right now, sector governors have no wealth. That's a small bug that I will fix shortly. But eventually, when you start having coalitions and you have plots, characters will spend their own money in order to advance plots and the success of plots. The money also comes from if you ask a character for kickbacks, they need to have money in order to give you kickbacks. And then autonomy, this is going to be a major feature going forward. You'll be able to give characters 4 levels of autonomy depending on your power level. Nominal is right now where a character essentially runs their affairs, but they cannot do edicts, they cannot take over ownership of military forces, they cannot set sector taxes, but they generally, for the most part, have control over their planet or area of responsibility. Now, this can go down. This can become no autonomy, where basically they must do everything you ask. They really have no say. Everything at this point, it becomes micromanaged. They must agree to everything you ask. They must support every edict that passes through. and they must accept every tax change on the planet. Naturally, this makes viceroys very unhappy, not to mention system or sector governors. You will not be able to change autonomy to none unless you have a power of at least 50. Now also you can give significant autonomy to a character. This is similar to nominal, except now they can actually control the military. Sometimes they can pass edicts on their own. And most importantly, they can change the taxes with more freedom. And then you have full autonomy, which essentially means that they can pass all edicts. They can essentially do whatever they want with their area of responsibility. You have essentially removed control. You no longer have, if military has been relinquished, you will no longer have control of the military. You can no longer issue planetary edicts because you have essentially given up your right. You have essentially made this area of responsibility an independent entity. So this is not something you would do very often unless you had a situation where you had a massive coalition against you and the leader is saying, I want you to make me full autonomy. Essentially, if you give a sector full autonomy, you are creating a breakaway state. All right, intel is the level of intel that you have on this character. Now, there's a couple of ways to increase this level. The first one, the easiest way, is simply talk to them and interact with them. Over time, you will build up an intel. The second way is to allocate domestic intel resources. What we call it political intel now. You would allocate informers to this character by basically first creating informers and then assigning them at this screen. So the higher the intel, the more you know, and some of these question marks will start to become more refined. Your power is always known, but then as your intel goes up, these question marks will start being ranges, and then they will get closer to the character's actual values. Popular support, you don't know until you put informers on it. Once you have informers assigned to a character, at that point you will see their popular support. Now, as I said earlier, popular support is important for things like assassinations and how happy your population is. If they are under a character that has a low popular support, that will affect unrest, and it will also affect your own popular support to some extent. All right, observe traits. There are many different traits. I'm actually going to highlight some of the more common ones. There's about 20 right now in the game, and I will probably add a wiki page to kind of because they are important. But some of the more important ones are benevolent. That means a character tends to lean a nationalist. They tend to be more focused on edicts and actions that benefit their people. They're not going to be generally bribed. They're not going to be generally blackmailed. They're not going to generally pressure subordinates. They're basically not going to do tyrannical things. Also, just is another trait that ties along with that, but it's sort of a more extreme form of that. On the flip side, you have craven, which basically works the opposite of benevolent, and cruel, which is the flip side of just. So you can flip what I said about benevolent and just, and it applies to cruel and craven. You have honest. So if a character refuses a bribe several times, they may be honest. Now, it is possible to be honest and be tyrannical. These are not mutually exclusive. I want to make that clear. You can have a tyrannical leading benevolent leader. It is rare, but essentially you have a leader that's very much for themselves but also believes in treating their people fairly. So think of it as chaotic good or some such. So it's not a completely black and white system, and that is working as intended. You also have some economic, supports manufacturing, supports agriculture, supports science. So when they get this trait, they are far more likely to accept interactions that expand sectors, that raise wages, basically that expand that particular economic sector. You have planner, which is a very important trait, fairly rare to get, but essentially planners do a fantastic job of running their planet. In fact, they're able to find additional land on the planet so you can increase the maximum development level of a planet. There's a chance once you have a viceroy with a planner trait. So those are very good to have in your pocket, and those once you're able to move characters around, would be good people to consider moving to your more important planets if they are willing to go. You have a Keynesian, which is essentially laissez-faire. They don't like to raise taxes very much. They're going to keep sector taxes low in order to promote the government sectors increasing. So, for instance, if you want your agriculture sector to grow, a Keynesian governor or viceroy would keep those taxes low in order to give that sector more of a chance to grow and not have to give up so much of its profits. You have so those are pretty much your most important ones. There are others, but those are the ones that are going to come up most frequently. All right, alliances. So if a character is publicly allied to you, as I've said, basically their power is going to be thrown behind your overall power. That's going to be reflected in your political power. So in practical terms, it means they've publicly stated that I'm allied, I'm for the emperor, I believe in what he does, and I stand behind him. Now that can change, of course, if you anger the character, or act in a way, or if you change your maybe you've been nationalist for a while and the character's nationalist. If you start going tyrannical and get too far outside of their continuum rating, then they may no longer be allied to you. So that can change. You also have neutral, which most of the characters start with. It means they have not declared either way. They're just kind of going about their business and kind of seeing what the lay of the land is. They can also be publicly opposed to you, which means they've openly decided to speak out against you. They hate you enough and they feel secure enough that they openly can say that you're not doing a good job. So at the beginning of the game, you really won't have anybody like that. As the game progresses, especially if your power starts to drop significantly. It's already pretty low when you start because you're an 18-year-old kid. But if the power starts dropping into the teens, something like that, and you have some characters that you've angered, they may be far more likely to come out publicly oppose you, which will actually drop your power even further. So you really want to, if you start, if you have a powerful sector governor that is publicly opposed to you, you need to address that because it can definitely go badly. All right, so there are many different things that you can do with a character. Now, to do an interaction, it takes admin. And the admin depends on what you're trying to do. So, it's, for example, to bribe a character, if you look over here, it shows you the admin required is 3. It gives you a tooltip explaining what it does. So we can bribe characters. Now, these blue buttons basically are personal actions. They are things that you do to a character directly. They don't necessarily involve their area of responsibility. These are direct personal actions. This square over here, if it's red, it will tend to be seen as a tyrannical action. If it is blue, I need to change that to green, but it will be seen as a nationalist action. And if you see a number in the square, it means it will take that amount of either nationalist or tyrannical influence points in order to execute that action. So since we have a sector governor, I'll give an example. So we want to give a praising speech. Now it costs 2 nationalist influence, which we do have exactly 2, so it gives us that option. Now they already like me, even though we don't see their loyalty. They're allied, so they must like us at least somewhat. So we just go ahead and we click on it, and it says, "What a wonderful honor. I truly appreciate your kind words." So it went over well. Now, when you have a conversation, or when you give a speech, or when you do something that's public for a character, it helps to have a high charisma. If you have a low charisma, it could even backfire. You could try to give a praising speech, and it could be seen as pandering or self-serving. So you have to kind of look at your emperor's strengths and opportunities. So, so with the sector governor, there aren't as many options. I do want to go over the pressure and persuade subordinate system. So when you are trying to get a character to do something, and they're just not, for whatever reason, say you're trying to get them to expand a sector, or raise taxes, or lower taxes, or raise wages. Typically, these would be the economic things where you're trying to get them to do an act. Now, you have several options. You can always do an edict. Obviously, that takes a lot more time and money, but it has to be done. It just the length of time it takes may vary. What you can also do is, if you have someone that is willing to, you can have them pressure a subordinate. So let's kind of look and let's see. Let's go to New Terra. And let's see what we can do. Let's kind of take a look at the situation. Now, one change I've made in this build is that I've standardized New Terra. I've essentially, there was a kind of a small issue where sometimes a planet would have 350 admin and it would just be a ruinous cost on the budget. So I've changed it to kind of standardized. It will always have 30 manufacturing, 30 agriculture, and 20 science. And their population will be pretty steady. So there will still be some changes because you can't set the admin. It depends on how many characters when you seed the system actually take a government job, but it does tend to make it easier to control. So when we take a look, so we see that we probably need to cut, we are spending $294 billion on the governmental sector. When we look at our cash flow, as you can see, that's a huge amount, $294 billion, and of that, $193 billion is for admin costs directly. So that's what's actually running this huge admin. Now, sometimes if you need a lot of admin to run an empire, you just have to bite the bullet. And I don't really know. I'd have to take a look at my plans. But for the purpose of this tutorial, we're going to assume that I don't need that much admin and I don't want to spend that much. So we want to decrease the government on the planet. So to do that, we have to talk to June.
Communication established.
And you see now we have more options. And one of them is reduce planetary government. Okay, it costs 2 ADM. We really don't know anything about how she feels. She has no traits. We don't have a Psylocke. We don't have a loyalty. So we don't really know how they feel. So we're going to kind of put a shot in the dark. We're going to reduce planetary, click it, and it says, all right, absolutely not, Your Excellence. I refuse to relinquish or lessen my authority on this planet. So it's an 8 calculated chance. Now that's kind of I left it in there. That was kind of for bug testing and to kind of make sure there's a lot of different modifiers that go into their decisions, and I decided just to leave it in there so that you could get some feedback as the player as to how close or far away you were to having. So if it's negative 240 calculated chance, then you know that this is not going to happen without some serious persuasion. And so I guess it's equivalent to reading body language. So I'm going to leave it in there going forward. Okay, so we're close. So we could try bribing the character. We could try to increase their loyalty. We have a lot of different options. There's not really a right or wrong way to do this. But because I want to show you the persuade pressure system, so we're going to click on Candy Jackson. You can see we could also do the system governor. So we're going to click on Candy, and actually we're going to do a turn, because if you lose, I'm going to go ahead and go to the next turn, because you actually lose pressure over a series of turns if you don't use it, and I want to show that in the same turn. Alright, so we're going to go ahead, we're going to go back in, we're going to go ahead and talk to Candy. Alright, and we're going to pressure subordinate. Now, I don't know. For all I know, she's evil. For all I know, she's benevolent. I don't know yet. So in a real game, I probably wouldn't do this until I got to know her a little bit better, because I don't want to piss off a 200 power sector governor that's in my corner. But I'm not doing this to be smart. I'm doing this to show the setup. So we're going to pressure subordinate. So you just say who you wanted me to put the squeeze on, and then it shows all of their subordinates. This would be their system governors and their viceroys. So obviously we want to. We want to, you can see if you forget, you can kind of do over. So we're going to do New Terra for June Blanchard. She's the Viceroy. All right, you got it, Your Excellence. Just tell me when, what, and where, and I'll explain your position to June. You're exhausting my resources, Your Excellence. I need time to let my people rest. So when you ask a governor to pressure someone, you're not asking them to literally just go and twist their arm. What you're doing is you're asking them to marshal their resources, their political resources, their military resources, financial resources, and put pressure in many different areas on a particular person. Now, fatigue doesn't necessarily reflect physical fatigue. It reflects what you'd almost call material fatigue, the resource fatigue. So you can't lean on people to do things all the time. So that's kind of what that represents. All right, so she put 93 fatigue, so that's a pretty good sign. That means there's probably a pretty good chance she put a lot of pressure on. So now we're going to click on June. Well, no, she didn't. She put 8. So she expended a lot of resources and got very little results. So that could mean she's just not very good at this. So we are going to, well, we're going to try it anyway. We're actually, no, we're going to see if our system governor will put a little pressure on too. What do you need now, Your Excellence? Okay, she doesn't seem to like me very much. But we're going to try anyway. All right, we're going to... Absolutely not. I will never strong-arm June anything for you. So, not only did this backfire, it backfired badly. So she's going to tell June that I tried to have her strong-arm. And that's not going to help my relations. So that's something that can happen. So it's not generally a good idea to force someone that doesn't like you to try to strong-arm someone, especially if they're benevolent or just. So we're kind of stuck with what we have. So We're going to go back to June, and we're going to try it. We're going to try reducing planetary government. All right, it worked. I don't like reducing our infrastructure, but if you think it's best, I'll do it. I don't appreciate being strong-armed and reducing my power, not a little bit. So she did it because the pressure worked, but she does not like the fact that she was strong-armed. So anytime you apply pressure, even if you get a successful result, especially if you get a successful result, then they're going to hate you more, and you'll have to kind of take that into account. Okay, so the persuade works pretty much the same way, except it is considered much nicer. More characters are willing to persuade. It's not nearly as effective as pressure. It's kind of like when you have a nationalist influence versus tyrannical. It's a very, a nationalist is not as effective as tyrannical, but obviously it goes over a lot better. So it works the same way as far as that goes. All right. So I hope you have a little bit of understanding about the character system, about what everything means, and about how that interacts, and what you can use to influence your characters. That's all for this episode. Have a great day. We'll see you next tutorial.